I think when people are scared of LinkedIn, i.e., leadership, are scared personally of the platform, they dumb it down to it's just posting. It looks pretty. It's easy to write a few sentences, but that's not what the real breakthrough is. It's the confidence. It is the building your own brand and standing out in a room.
Hi, I'm Andrew Seal, and I'd like to welcome you to my podcast, How to Run a Happy Employee Advocacy Pilot. This podcast explores the best way for organisations to launch and sustain successful employee advocacy programmes. Now, employee advocacy is often described as a complex and difficult task, and while I'd agree there are many moving parts to coordinate, at its heart is a simple framework which puts employees at the centre. And this is what I define as happy employee advocacy, a programme which delivers results for the business by focusing first on what's in it for their employees. I'm delighted to welcome Michelle J Raymond today as my guest. Michelle is head B2B growth coach and LinkedIn trainer at the B2B Growth Co. And she is prolific on LinkedIn, creating amazing content and sharing huge value every day. She's the author of 2 books, the LinkedIn Branding Book and Business Gold. She's the host of 2 podcasts and much, much more. But to be honest, Michelle, I can't keep up. It's fantastic what you're doing.
Thank
Now,
you. Some days I'm not sure I can keep up.
no, I've been an avid follower of your content for quite a few years now, and we first met on LinkedIn, and you recently had me on your podcast, which was a great experience, and very much inspired me to take the step to start my own podcast. So welcome to the show, Michelle. It's fantastic to have you here today.
And it is absolutely brilliant to be your first, and congratulations on getting started because I've been following your content for just as long, and I know how much you're going to bring to this conversation to help businesses really get started with employee advocacy the happy way, because there's lots of different ways that we can go around this, but I like that you always stipulate the happy way.
Brilliant, thank you. So today we're going to be talking about those opportunities for companies in employee advocacy, what it looks like when it's successful, and most importantly, how to avoid some of the common mistakes when launching a pilot to give you the best chance of success. So I'm very excited to hear what you've got to say about this. So first, to kick it off, we're going to go with a quick definition because not everyone is 100% clear on what employee advocacy actually is, or in fact what success in this area looks like. So could you start off with defining employee advocacy and tell us what you think success is, what success looks like in employee advocacy for an organisation?
The first thing I would say is what it isn't, and it isn't forcing your employees to reshare company content. Now, what is it if it's not that? I think it's the company and the employees working together, and it's on the company to help the employees build their own voices. And I think that's the shift that I'd like to see at the moment because if I look back a little bit, it has definitely been the former where people say, you know what, just get your employees out there, get them sharing company content. It's their job. And it's almost an element of force. And I can assure all of your listeners that force will get you nowhere because the minute that someone's busy or you look the other way, it will fall over. So, what does it look like when it's successful? I think it's that whole collaborative spirit that happens within teams, across teams. And people are doing it because both sides are getting a return on the effort that they're putting in. It's acknowledged by the business, the effort that these employee advocates are putting into it. And often it's not their job that they're paid for. This is something that people often volunteer for. And so I love the idea of people, it's like a two-way street. Company gets definitely upside, and then the employees also get upside rather than the sheer brute force that's been there in the past. So again, that's probably why your words around happy employee advocacy programs really resonate with me because I've seen too many unhappy ones.
I love that. I love that you mentioned the kind of collaborative approach. I think that's becoming a bigger and bigger thing for marketeers these days, and the idea of a win-win situation where the business is winning but the employees are winning makes complete sense in that context. So that's great to hear.
I think about flipping it around, like not just putting everything on the employees. Like as businesses, you can use your reputation in the industry to really uplift your employees. And the more that you do it together, the synergy is just amazing. So I can't wait to continue this conversation, let you know how we can do these things.
Brilliant, brilliant. So there was a recent report from Ogilvy, it just came out in January this year, 2024, that said that employee advocacy is their number one trend in influencer marketing. That's their prediction for this year. And one of the stats in the report said that in their research, 89% of C-suite marketeers were recognizing that employees as influencers holds immense value for their business due to the insider knowledge and authentic advocacy that comes from a belief in a shared vision. It feels like we've been with predictions like this for a while now. Many large companies have embraced employee advocacy, but it still doesn't feel like it's gone completely mainstream yet. Why do you think it hasn't broken through into the mainstream perhaps yet? And do you believe in Ogilvy's prediction? Do you think it will in 2024?
I believe in their predictions, and I think businesses today have got two choices. Our organic reach on social media platforms is getting harder and harder. Doesn't matter, my specialty is LinkedIn, doesn't matter which one you prefer to play on, but ultimately it's getting closer and closer to a pay to play kind of approach. Now I look at it and I think, okay, we've got two choices in 2024 and beyond. Are we going to pay these platforms for advertising, which we know that the research shows that most people don't believe content that comes out from brands? Or are you going to invest that money into your team and build up your employee advocacy program? I'd like to see more and more of that happen. I think it's still very, very new, especially I come from the B2B space, so in business to business. And even the thought of marketing in general is something that's really new in that space. Now, that sounds crazy because it's not like people have been selling business to business, just in the last 5 minutes. And we've seen that B2C, they've done it amazing. They know how to work, marketing. But B2B, I think they're just falling behind. So I often find that employee advocacy sounds really great. It sounds like a great idea. But there's one tricky piece to it, and that's called people. And you can't just flick a switch and control the people that work for you. And I think it's not quite so easy unless you've got an organization that's got really great values established, a great corporate culture before we start trying to get people across to sharing things about what they do on socials. And I think that's the trick. If you don't have that in place, it's almost like you're building your house on sand. We know what's going to happen pretty quickly. And so, I'd like to think that it's going to happen. I've got my fingers crossed that it's going to happen. And this is right because I would love to have more employees empowered to share their voices. Like I'm a big fan of that. I just don't know how much it'll go from something that's like a fad and cool words to say to actually businesses implementing long-term programs. Easy to do it in the short term. As you know, Andrew, I'm sure with your clients, it's really easy when people are super excited. But what happens when that excitement wears off? And I think that's the piece that we need to focus on.
That's brilliant. Yeah, that makes complete sense. I think also we'll be talking some more about that in a second. But what do you think? Some people I've heard speak from a sort of senior marketeer in a large companies where the most important thing for them really is predictability. I mean, you talked about the people challenge and sustaining it. And do you think companies think it's of higher value to have the predictability of perhaps paid media, where even if the ROI, even if it's getting more expensive and the ROI is going down, at least they know pretty much that if you spend X, you're going to get Y. Whereas obviously still in the kind of perhaps almost experimental form of marketing stage for some companies, and it's less predictable. So do you think that's an issue for people, for businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. Letting your employees get active on a social platform is a perceived risk within businesses. It's not seen as something that's exciting. For most people, when I have these kinds of conversations, the business owners or, someone leadership teams, what comes out of them is, Michelle, what if we do this and someone poaches our best staff because all of a sudden they're visible, they're not hidden in the background. The other piece of that puzzle, which you just mentioned, is I think it's pretty tricky sometimes to put a dollar figure on what is the ROI in investing in these employee advocacy programs. With your paid advertising, it's probably much easier, but with employee advocacy, I don't think that there's a lot of guidance around, well, how do we measure these returns? So, as a leadership team, if you're weighing up pros and cons, I think the risks, the thing that stands out the most, because we are in relatively new territory. This is not something that's been done for a long time. And I think that people would uh, rather be protective of their business. And I think it's a shame because I think what you're going to do is let your competitors take over that space. And those that trust their employees, those that support their employees, and those that are there to help them build their personal brands and backed by the company brand and vice versa, they're going to be the winners in every industry. But is it as easy as like some of those stats say? Yeah, there's a lot of upside if you can make it work. But, I think if we get over that first hurdle, which is how do we make employee advocacy not scary for business leaders? I think that's where we need to address first.
No, that's a really important. That takes me neatly on to the next question, really, which is, what do you think? Today, we're talking about companies who are potentially interested in the idea of launching a pilot, an employee advocacy pilot. What would you say are the key things that are stopping them step forward? And you mentioned a couple of them there, I think, around risk and things. But could you clarify that a bit further?
Look, I think the first piece of the puzzle is a real lack of awareness and understanding about what it is, maybe what it isn't. At the end of the day, you can't force someone to post things on their personal socials. You don't own it. And I think as we said, it's just new. And in a lot of businesses, digital marketing in general might also just be new. So we're kind of, going into that last frontier about how do we get businesses active in digital? So I think firstly, it's the lack of awareness and understanding. The second thing, as I said before, it's all about the culture and also your organization's readiness. Are you actually ready with everything that's going on in the business to commit and go all in on this kind of program? Now, that starts at the top. If your leadership you don't have buy-in from them, they're not supporting it, and they think it's just something, it's a nice thing that someone else can run and they don't need to worry about, then I can assure you it's going to fall over pretty quickly because the resources won't flow. You lead by example, and that to me is another one of the issues. And again, resource allocation. Do the people have enough time? Do they have the support and training? Or is that something that's also been overlooked? As I mentioned just earlier, being able to measure the ROI on this time, like, how do we measure the value of a like, the value of impressions? These things can be tricky for a new business entering into employee advocacy. And as I said before, the perceived risk, this is a huge jump for a lot of businesses. And it comes back to that values. It comes back to what's going on in the business in general. If you don't trust your staff and you don't support them and you don't help them achieve their goals in general, then it's not going to work over in employee advocacy by magic. And these are the kinds of things that I would say we need to take a look at. They're easily fixed, easily addressed, but ultimately it might require that you need to invest in some training or some support, like from people like yourself or myself. This is what we do, is help people get started. And I think that's the thing that I hope that people take away from this. Yes, there are barriers and I acknowledge those, but they really can be overcome pretty simply.
Like you talked about the trust and with employees, and I suppose it's a bit like it's giving up some level of control, isn't it? Really, when you employ advocacy, you are opening the business up to for more people to be involved in the messaging and the brand and the comm side of it. It's not so controlled by the central marketing team or the leadership, and that is a big change, isn't it, for companies to do that. So obviously, I can see that trust is a key thing. One thing I was thinking about in employee advocacy, I was wondering what you thought on this, was that, do you think a challenge for businesses when they're thinking of doing this is in overcoming many of the things you just mentioned there? It's not easy to see what their competitors are doing or what the successful people are doing out there, because if you were looking at an ad campaign, you could go and look at seeing all the ads they're doing and go, oh, they're doing amazing ads, we could do something like that. But or you could even visit their brand social channels and see what they're doing there. But with this, it's quite hard to see. I think if you're saying what are my competitors doing in this space, to see what they're doing, because there's lots of micro steps, isn't it? It's kind of lots of people doing things, and you can't just bring it all together in one nice big ad and go, "This is what we need to do." What are your thoughts on that?
I think with ads, there's a much shorter time frame for you to see the impact of the work that you're doing. With things like employee advocacy, they take time, and you can't see what your competitors are doing, like you said. But I often think that when it comes to employee advocacy, I think that the biggest block, and I don't care whether it's a CEO or a new starter and everywhere in between, the fact is, most people are petrified of putting themselves out there on social media in general. Like we say, yeah, sure, go do employee advocacy. It's better than advertising. Here's all the upside, and I can give you all the stats. But personally, even if we look at LinkedIn or studies on online communities, we know that the stats are 97 to 99% of people are never going to want to post content, like or engage, or do anything on the platform other than log in, take a look around, and then get on and, with the rest of their day. Now, that especially applies when you're at work on a professional platform like LinkedIn. People are terrified. Andrew, what if I post the wrong thing? What happens if my boss says I shouldn't have done this or I shouldn't have done that? What are the implications? Like, if people's livelihoods are at risk, they're going to be much more reluctant to get involved with projects like this. And so, when you're looking at that option, do I just go and pay for ads? Do I go and do something that is in so many ways perceived risky by the business and by the individual? Like, it's a big deal to have a successful advocacy program. And I think there's things you can put in place to get around that. But at that beginning, when businesses are weighing it up, I can see why many will choose ads. It seems like a safer bet, but I'm not sure. I've seen the way agencies run some of these ad accounts. It's sort of like you're betting to try and see if this will work or that will work, rather than actually having a process involved and a really good framework for ads. I've seen too many. I've had clients come back to me. I look after company pages on the organic side on LinkedIn. And, I see people that are wasting so much money on ads. It's kind of crazy. And I think that's the other piece of the puzzle they need to consider.
I think that's a very good point. I think so much money is wasted on ads, and you're absolutely right. But as you say, it just feels more in control. It's easier to see what's going on. But I think your point earlier about employees being terrified almost to share on LinkedIn or to share profession, I think is a really good point. And I feel that that's the part that's often missing in employee advocacy thinking or planning, or even the kind of the kind of rush for almost to use a tech platform straight away, is that it's missing that key thing. The key barrier isn't necessarily, I mean, one of the barriers is time and all the things that people talk about, but is actually just taking that first step to actually start opening yourself up personally, because that's the thing, it's a personal thing, isn't it? And you're going on to social media, and yeah, what if you do it wrong? What if you say the wrong thing? So I
You've
think
got
that it feels like a really important thing to address early on.
Yeah, you absolutely nailed it. And when you think about it, we've got different generations in the workspace, all have their different views on how you should approach, social platforms. And employee advocacy is far more than just posting. It's easy to grab some content that the marketing team created and press, repost or post, depending what technology you've got. But that's not what employee advocacy is. It's not quite that simple. So I think when you start to think about all the different ways that impacts people and all the different personalities, you've got introverts, extroverts, different age groups, like I said, like it does become tricky, to implement this on top of people's everyday lives. And, that's the thing. When you acknowledge that, you can do something about it. But to pretend, like I said, it's a flick the switch. Oh, we're now in an employee advocacy program. Off we go. Everyone's going to be fine. Yeah, I don't, it's a car crash waiting to happen.
So that leads me to my big question today. Really, it was, well, we are looking to help people thinking about launching programs to overcome some of these barriers and to manage some of these risks. So you're going to tell us what you think are the 10 most common mistakes people make when launching a pilot, and what can listeners today What could they do to avoid these to give themselves a much higher chance of success when they try to launch their pilot?
Yeah, I have got a list of 10 that I think will help. But number one is a lack of clear objectives. If you don't start this project with a goal in mind of where you're trying to head to, then everything else will just fall over in the future. And again, I love when people are really excited and enthusiastic when they're starting out, but take a moment out to actually put down what are the objectives of this. It is not just tick, get an employee advocacy program in place. It is tied back to some form of business goals. This employee advocacy program should be driving you towards those objectives. So making sure you've got those in place. A lack of planning. I think people underestimate just how big a job that this will be. Even if you start small, there are a lot of moving pieces. And that for me is a really important piece. And that can be like setting up some guardrails for people to protect the business, to protect the employees, to set up some goals so everyone knows what's expected of them. Spend time up front. It's an investment. And just by doing these kinds of things, it's really going to help. I think the next thing is not getting executive buy-in. So this is not something that one team can do on their own. It is something that needs to come from the leadership group. And that could be one person who's the CEO, or it could be a group of people, depending on the size of the company. But you cannot wipe your hands of the employee advocacy program and try and leave it to someone else to make happen. It is definitely, as I've said probably many times throughout this podcast, it is not do as I say and not as I do. People are watching you. They are taking your lead. And also those executives will give the resources towards the program to make sure that it comes to
Cool.
life. And also I think acknowledgement from them goes a long way, because imagine you're petrified, you're starting out, and then your CEO comes and says, great job, love your work, I can see what you've been doing. You're just all of a sudden going to feel 10 foot tall and bulletproof, which I think is also important.
Yeah.
We've also got neglecting the target audience. So what I mean by that is, when we talk about employee advocacy, quite often it's how can we get our employees to share as much information about our business to their networks? Now, yes, maybe that's a small piece of it, but you're missing the whole point. You're actually trying to do this in service of your target audience. So if you're too focused on me as a brand and just pushing that out at people, I worked with a client recently. I had a quick look through all of their content, and all it was our company's amazing. Our company's amazing. Basically, they said it 1,000 different ways. There was nothing about what they did and how they solved the problems of their target audience. So that way, that one's pretty important. I think also people overcomplicate the pilots, which is where I know your program would really come in handy for a lot of businesses. I think people try and cram too much too quickly and underestimate just how hard it is to form these habits on social media. So I think stripping it back, maybe that's a smaller number of people involved, a shorter time frame, making sure that everyone's really set up for success, whether it's like training or support in some way. I think that's important. We've also got number 6 would be underestimating resources. Again, time, money, effort, technology, these kinds of things, making sure that we're set up. We've also got number 7. I think this is in general in businesses could do better, and that is poor communication. If you don't have people talking to each other, with each other, supporting, giving feedback in a creative, like in a, I guess, in a space where people are going to be overly sensitive, to make sure you're giving them feedback in a way that's constructive, that they feel supported, that takes a bit of skill, and same with the participants, feeding back with the issues that they're having. Because the last thing they want to do is put their hand up for a program and then realize, this is really scary, but I don't want to tell my colleagues, my boss, my whatever. So, just be mindful of these kinds of things. I think as well is number 8 would be ignoring user feedback. So when you have people in the pilot, or maybe the program's gone beyond that, listen for what they're coming back to you with. What issues are they having? Do they need your support more so to help provide more content? Do they need help providing graphics? Do they need training on learning how to use the platform of choice? In my case, I've had some businesses that wanted to flick the switch, but forgot to train people on how do you use LinkedIn. Like there was so much assumed knowledge. It was kind of crazy. Number nine, I would say, is a lack of flexibility. And I know people love structure, and I can understand how that's important for a business. But when we're starting out, I just think you need to be mindful of what's going on emotionally and have empathy for the people that are participating. And realize when you're starting, you might have thought you were going one way and going to do it a certain way, but it's okay to kind of stop and reflect and refine. And I think the last one, number 10, is the most important. And that is you cannot force anybody to participate in an employee advocacy program. Please don't. Whoever's listening to this amazing podcast, please do not ever try and force all of your staff to participate. This is my public service announcement. Please do not do it. It won't reflect on your brand well, and it can have other implications. Might have someone that's really great at their job, you force them into this program and you lose them as an employee, which, has bigger implications in the business. So go gently, go with empathy and kindness, and really set your employees up for success. And that is just going to reflect on your brand. You're going to have better retention. You're going to have much more positive images about the brand on socials, which is only going to generate more leads and opportunities. So lots of upside, but yeah, hopefully those 10 have helped people out on maybe what not to do.
Amazing, Michelle. That's absolutely fantastic. I mean, so many good points there that I think will be of huge value. I think the word that sort of stood out that came up, in a number of times through there was empathy, and I think the idea of listening, as you say, listening to their feedback, but also understanding that people perhaps might be scared, that communication thing, understanding the needs they have, the training or the support they might need, all the way through that feels like it's something that should feed all the way through a program ongoing, really. And the acknowledgement piece you mentioned earlier, I think is so important as well. Is that I've seen that because essentially you're on your own when you're doing it. You're on social media. You perhaps might feel like you're sharing into a kind of a black hole and no one's noticed in the company. So I'd absolutely agree with you. The idea of small things like to the management or your boss or leadership, whoever, acknowledging that you've shared or done something good on social, I think is as you say, is worth a huge amount.
And
So
that's the opportunity for the employees as well, Andrew. You can get noticed by people further up. There's something in it for the employees just as much as there is for the company. And when it's balanced like that, I remember I worked for a company that had 15,000 employees. I'm based here in Sydney, Australia. And I started posting social content long before anyone else in that company did or even does now. And what happened was it got noticed by people way up the food chain who I'd never even heard of, were probably never going to have a conversation. And that opened up other opportunities for me. And, I think that's where I really saw the power of being active and what's in it for me, building my own personal brand and not just what was in it for the company. And so there's lots of cool things that can happen for people if we just get that balance right.
I think that's it, the balance. I've heard similar stories. I think the opportunity for employees to increase their visibility within the company by doing this is immeasurable, really. And I was chatting to one guy who works for a big bank, and he was saying he was motivated to go onto LinkedIn because he could see colleagues who were on it getting talked about and getting noticed more internally more than he was. And he was just thinking, well, I'm as good as they are, but I'm not getting noticed as well. So he was quite motivated to do that. I thought that was interesting.
And that's an important point, finding what is it that motivates that particular employee. How can you use this program to help them achieve whatever it is? It might be a promotion. They might want to be in another department. They might want speaking opportunities. They might want to have lunch with the CEO. Like, I don't care what the thing is, but you've got to tap into what that is. So that is what will keep them motivated. The more that you reinforce with, we're getting closer to it and measure it based on what they get out of it, not just what the business gets out of it, then you're both happy, and happy employees stay in jobs longer. So that retention rate goes up, and that collaboration doesn't just stop during employee advocacy. It's going to happen in all the work that happens in the business. And that kind of culture is one where people want to work and people want to stay working. So there's so much upside when you get that balance right.
I think that's a very good point there. Actually, it isn't just about sharing on LinkedIn, is it? I think people, when they start building their confidence in their views and their own expertise, they can take that into meetings or into client meetings or their work. I think there's huge value, isn't there, beyond simply just posting on LinkedIn.
And I think when people are scared of LinkedIn, i.e., leadership, are scared personally of the platform, they dumb it down to it's just posting. It looks pretty. It's easy to write a few sentences, but that's not what the real breakthrough is. It's the confidence, like you said. It is the building your own brand and standing out in a room. And I think that was also my favorite thing. I come from 20 years in B2B sales. And when I started to build my personal brand on LinkedIn, what I love the most is when we went to those trade shows where we'd have the booth. And I'm a typical extroverted salesperson, so I love being on the booth. But I worked in an industry where the people I was serving were research and development chemists in the beauty industry. Now, they are typically introverted, and the thought of coming near a salesperson freaked them out. But what would happen is I would have a lineup of people at my booth because they'd seen my content. So I could very easily connect. I do this, this is the impact. And it gave those people a reason to come and connect with me and the business. And, so there's lots of different ways that employee advocacy, building up your team, building up the employees and the brand together, it literally turns into dollar signs, which I've not yet met a business that is not looking to make more money. So if that's a listener that's out there and wants to make more money, that's why this is a worthwhile investment, not just now, not just for 2024, because it sounds like a cool trend, but even if those employees do leave your business because they do get spotted and an opportunity comes their way, they're going to look back fondly on your business and carry that forward. And so there's not a big loss there. But ultimately, if we can get past those fears, personal and the risk to the business, and start building on this, it's just so cool to watch when a business is thriving like that.
I 100% agree. I think it's an amazing opportunity for businesses, isn't it? And I think more and more starting to see that and take those first steps. So that's brilliant. And so hopefully this will help them. So with that in mind, if there is somebody listening today thinking, well, I'd like to start this process, what's one thing somebody could do to kick off the process of launching a pilot? What could they do first?
I think the first thing is to ask for volunteers. Who in your business is interested in being a part of this? It is much easier to train and develop someone that is willing and volunteering than just throwing a blanket over the whole company. So for me, start small. Maybe it's just 5 people out of the business rather than trying to go for 105. The smaller you start, and then, like you mentioned, people start to look around and go, hey, what are they getting? They're getting more notice than me. They're standing out more than me. They're getting more opportunities than me. I want to be a part of that. And you'll start to see people want, more volunteers come forward. And I think that's important. So I know I've said it a few times in the episode, but just asking for volunteers and then working out how can you all work together, start small and then get big is definitely my piece of advice here.
No, I think that's great advice because you need to understand when you're starting who are the people who are interested, aren't you? Because that can help give you start that momentum really. If you know these different people are perhaps seeing who's perhaps already active on LinkedIn or whatever else they're doing. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So thank you so much for all your insight today, Michelle. It's been absolutely fantastic. Every time I read something from you or hear from you, I learn something new. So it's been great. So I know you're busy, so I really appreciate your time today. So finally, where can people find you? And is there anything we could do to help you?
Look, you are going to find me over on LinkedIn. So, how you can help me is if you've listened to this podcast and you've enjoyed it, I'd love it if you could reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn. Search for Michelle J Raymond. The J is there to make life easier for me to stand out and you to find me. And the other thing is, if you go across to YouTube, at Michelle J Raymond is my YouTube channel where I share lots of cool tips on how you can leverage LinkedIn to grow your business. So, Andrew, it has been my absolute pleasure to be here and share this. Thank you for the opportunity as well. I know this podcast is just going to be awesome. And, I think we'll have a lot more, I guess what my hope is that by the end of 2024, we don't have to worry about, is this a risk or not? So if we can change that conversation by having this podcast, I think that'll be a pretty cool thing.
I agree. I think that's a great ambition for 2024. Let's do it. Thanks again,
Excellent.
Michelle, and look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.